Welcome to the deep dive. We're plunging into the currents of knowledge, trying to pull out the most important insights from, well, a whole stack of sources.
Yeah.
Our human story, it's often told through these grand migrations, right? Epic journeys across continents. But sometimes maybe the most astonishing chapters, they're kind of hidden in plain sight, or maybe even more remarkably, encoded right there in our DNA.
Exactly. And today we're digging into one of those really intriguing chapters, one that's been unresolved for a long time. The genetic origins of the people of Papua New Guinea. For decades, their unique physical features, they look strikingly different from other Asian groups, and they even share some traits with Sub-Saharan African populations, that fueled all these theories. Theories about a completely separate ancestral journey, maybe a much earlier one.
It really was a puzzle, wasn't it? It baffled scientists for so long. So here's the thing. What if cutting-edge AI, artificial intelligence, could finally settle one of these really intriguing debates in human history? What if it could show that what we thought we knew was, well, actually a remarkable genetic illusion?
And that's precisely our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack a groundbreaking new study. It was published in Nature Communications. This research used advanced AI to clarify the genetic origins of Papua New Guineans, and it revealed some truly surprising twists about our shared out-of-Africa story. We'll explore why the old theories held on for so long, how AI really changed the game, and, what this all means for understanding the incredible tapestry of human diversity.
Okay, so the stage was set basically for one of humanity's great genetic puzzles. How could a population look one way, their archaeology suggest something else, and their DNA just remain stubbornly? Well, unresolved. Let's dive into this enduring enigma. As you mentioned, the visual part is striking. When you look at people from Papua New Guinea, their physical features are distinct compared to other Asian populations. And like you said, they share some traits with Sub-Saharan African groups. That's what sparked those early ideas, right? A separate lineage, almost as if their appearance told a story genetics just couldn't quite confirm yet.
Absolutely. That visual distinctiveness, it directly fueled what became known as the first out-of-Africa hypothesis. And early archaeological finds seem to back this up. They suggested the ancestors of Papua New Guineans came from a separate, maybe earlier migration. I mean, the earliest human site in Oceania, it dates back maybe 50,000, even 60,000 years ago. That's older than the oldest sites in Europe. So this archaeological evidence, it really lent some weight to the idea of a very early, distinct movement. All right, so the archaeologists are looking at the digs and thinking, okay, this looks like a separate, earlier wave. But then came the genetic side, the genetic puzzles. When scientists started using, traditional DNA sequencing, looking at the maternal line, the paternal line, they couldn't find clear evidence. Not for the main ancestry, anyway, stemming from such an early migration. The genetic origin just remained, as the sources put it, unresolved. It left scientists sort of scratching their heads. Did they split off before Europeans and Asians? Did other unknown populations mix in? It was a genuine open question.
It really was, and that's exactly where AI comes in, offering a completely new lens on these ancient genes. A team of European researchers led by Dr. Mayuk Mandal, they used advanced artificial intelligence tools and really high-quality genomic data to compare lots of different demographic scenarios. They used the sophisticated method, it's called approximate Bayesian computation with deep learning and sequential Monte Carlo, or ABCDLS for short.
Okay, ABCDLS. That's a mouthful.
Yep.
How does that actually work? Like, what makes it such a breakthrough for modeling these really complex histories?
Right, well, think of ABCDLS as a kind of super smart genetic detective. Instead of just looking at the DNA we have now and making educated guesses, this AI, it simulates millions, literally millions, of possible human histories. So different migrations, population sizes changing, bottlenecks, mixing events, all that stuff. And then it uses statistics to figure out which of those simulated scenarios best explains the actual genetic patterns we see in people today. It's a huge leap beyond the older methods. They just couldn't handle that level of complexity, that nuance. Before AI, trying to unravel histories this tangled was, like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded. AI lets researchers test way more subtle and dynamic historical possibilities all at once, something that was just impossible before.
That's incredible. So after all that confusion, what did this AI-powered analysis finally tell us about their main ancestral line? What was the really big finding?
The core revelation, the big one, is that Papua New Guineans are genetically a sister group to other Asian populations. And this isn't just, a minor scientific correction. It's a pretty profound realignment of our human family tree. It tells us that despite the huge distances and the unique appearances, all non-African populations really do share a surprisingly recent single common thread
Mm.
from the same primary out-of-Africa event. And that happened roughly 62,400 years ago.
Wow, 62,000 years ago. That's a massive shift from that first out-of-Africa idea for their main lineage. So, okay, let's go back to that visual enigma you mentioned. If they're a sister group to other Asian populations, what explains their distinct appearance?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Dr. Mondal himself offered an insight there. He suggests that the unique physical features we see in Papua New Guineans, they likely come from natural selection, from adaptations to tropical climates over a very long time. So that would explain why they might look more like Sub-Saharan African groups, even though their genes clearly link them to other Asian populations. It's a powerful reminder, really, that appearance can sometimes be a bit of a misleading signal when you're talking about deep genetic ancestry. This really highlights one of humanity's sort of great genetic illusions. What you see with your eyes, or even what older genetic methods might have suggested, can sometimes hide a completely different, maybe even more dramatic true story buried in our DNA.
That's fascinating, a genetic illusion. So, if they are a sister group to other Asians, why did the earlier genetic data seem to point somewhere else? What was causing that misleading signal in the first place?
Right, this is really the crucial part. Previous analyses, especially using a technique called relative cross-coalescent rate, or RCCR.
RCCR. Okay. And just briefly, for anyone listening who isn't familiar, what exactly is RCCR?
Sure. RCCR is basically a kind of genetic clock. It tries to measure how long ago the genetic lines from two different populations shared a common ancestor. A faster coalescent rate usually suggests an older split, an older divergence. But as we're about to see, sometimes that clock can get thrown off quite badly. So looking at the RCCR data, it showed what looked like an earlier separation between Papua New Guinean and African populations, maybe around 100,000 years ago. And that signal was often interpreted as direct evidence for a big contribution from a first out-of-Africa event.
Okay, so the data itself was giving off a signal, but maybe the interpretation missed something crucial. It didn't account for some unique factors. What did the AI find was the real culprit behind this misleading signal?
Well, the AI study found that this shift you see in the RCCR curve, it isn't actually due to a major contribution from some earlier migration at all. Instead, it's a direct result of a really dramatic population bottleneck. This happened to the ancestors of Papua New Guineans after they reached the island of New Guinea. Their population numbers, the study says, dropped sharply and stayed low for thousands of years.
Wow. So it's not about when they left Africa necessarily, but about what happened to their population once they got to their new home. A profoundly different path. Because we know many other populations, especially in Europe and Asia, they had that big farming-driven population boom, right? That massively reshaped their demographics. But you're saying that didn't happen in Papua New Guinea.
Exactly. While large parts of Europe and Asia saw these huge population booms linked to farming, which really changed their genetic landscapes, the ancestors of Papua New Guineans went through something fundamentally different after they arrived. They did not experience the farming-driven population boom, and this led to a much slower population growth rate over a very long time. So these unique demographic events, this really severe bottleneck combined with slower growth, they created specific genetic signatures. And if you misunderstand those signatures, they could look like evidence of mixing with some unknown ancient group, basically created a bias in the data.
A bias that the AI was sophisticated enough to see through. Just to really nail this down for everyone listening, how does a bottleneck, even one that happened much later, create this illusion of an earlier split in the genetic clock?
Yeah.
How does it sort of ripple backward in time like that?
Yeah, it's a bit counterintuitive. Imagine tracing a family tree backward. If a really severe bottleneck happens, meaning only a very small number of individuals survive and pass on their genes, that resulting small gene pool looks much older and less diverse genetically, even if the bottleneck itself happened relatively recently. It creates the appearance, the illusion, that the whole lineage branched off from other groups much, much earlier than it actually did, because the patterns of genetic diversity end up resembling those you'd see in genuinely ancient splits. So even though the bottleneck for the ancestors of Papua New Guineans happened much later, around 46,200 years ago, it messed with those coalescent rate estimates way back, affecting the calculations for around 100,000 years ago. That's what shifted the RCCR curve and made people overestimate the separation times. And interestingly, the sources mentioned that the Andamanese population showed a somewhat similar pattern, which reinforces the idea that this bottleneck effect isn't totally unique to PNG. It can happen.
That's a really fascinating demonstration, how these complex population histories can leave such subtle and sometimes, misleading imprints on our genomes. But of course, the story of human ancestry is rarely simple, right?
Beyond these big demographic events, Papua New Guineans also carry these other ancestral echoes from other ancient hominins.
Absolutely. Let's talk about those ghostly relatives. The Papua New Guinean genome carries what the study calls a unique inheritance of Denisovan DNA. It's a significant chunk, about 3.23%. This likely came from genetic mixing, interbreeding with Denisovans somewhere in Southeast Asia or maybe Oceania itself around 31,200 years ago. It's just another piece of evidence for the complex interactions our ancestors had as they spread out.
And it's not just Denisovans, is it? Pretty much all out-of-Africa populations, and that includes Papua New Guineans, carry a noticeable percentage of Neanderthal DNA, around 4.04%, according to this study.
Yes, exactly. That mixing seems to have happened earlier, around 52,000 years ago. So that adds yet another layer to their already intricate ancestry. These ancient interbreeding events are really a shared part of the human story outside of Africa.
So pulling all these new insights together, the AI study really helps us refine the human family tree. And crucially, it clarifies that Papua New Guineans are a sister group, specifically to other East Asian populations, which, as you said, directly challenges those older arguments that sort of place them as an outgroup to both Europeans and East Asians, suggesting a much more fundamental, earlier branching point.
Right. This repositioning helps solidify a more unified timeline for the whole out-of-Africa migration story. The study suggests that all out-of-Africa populations split from African populations roughly 62,400 years ago. Then Neanderthals mixed in with these groups around 52,000 years ago. After that, Europeans and the ancestors of PNG East Asians diverged maybe around 51,200 years ago. And then East Asians and PNG ancestors split around 46,200 years ago. And then much later, we see that Denisovan mixing, specifically with the ancestors of Papua New Guineans, happening around 31,200 years ago. It paints a much clearer sequence of events.
What really stands out here, I think, is how this AI has allowed us to peel back these layers of misinterpretation. It reveals that the really striking distinctiveness of the Papua New Guinean population isn't primarily about some radically different ancient migration route. Instead, it's about a truly unique demographic journey after the main out-of-Africa event, a journey defined by those dramatic bottlenecks and those slower growth rates.
Absolutely. This deep dive really highlights not just the incredible power of AI in solving these kinds of long-standing mysteries in human history, but also, the crucial importance of understanding population-specific events, things like bottlenecks. We have to consider those unique histories when we interpret our ancient genetic past. It's a good reminder that the signals we see in our DNA today can sometimes be these complex echoes of really unique demographic experiences from long ago.
So for you, the listener, here's something to think about. If unique population histories can create genetic signals that mimic entirely different ancestral origins, well, what other chapters of humanity's story might be waiting to be reread? Especially now that we have these powerful new tools to look beyond the obvious surface signals.